ante el crimen más grande y monstruoso que se está cometiendo en el siglo XXI. No podemos callar, no callaremos. Venezuela seguirá hablando con su propia voz para decir ¡alto al genocidio contra el pueblo palestino! ¡Cese de fuego en Gaza! ¡Basta de bombardeo! ¡Basta de asesinato! ¡Paz para Palestina!
On behalf of the people of Venezuela, I would like to thank Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, for his recognition of Juan Guaidó as the interim President of Venezuela. Prime Minister Netanyahu joins our many allies in the hemisphere and the world in welcoming Venezuela back to the bloc of Western democratic nations that oppose despot and oppression. We certainly have a common enemy with Israel. That's why we, the Venezuelan people, look forward to the reestablishment of the diplomatic relations with the State of Israel. I myself look forward to visit the State of Israel as soon as we conquer freedom. We will prevail.
María Corina Machado, gracias. Thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you, and we'll stay in touch. And I promise one day we'll have a close relationship between Venezuela and Israel. And I believe, and I can announce this, that our government will move our Israeli embassy to Jerusalem. That will be part of our support to the state of Israel.
Creíble, una amenaza severa y una amenaza inminente. Y esa única amenaza que los hace ceder es la del uso de la fuerza internacional.
Si quiere preservar su vida, debe entender que llegó la hora de aceptar que el tiempo se les acabó.
Venezuela. When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door.
Born of Venezuela's old ruling caste, wired into Atlantis' power networks, an open disciple of Thatcher, and with ambitions likened to Pinochet, Machado has spent decades waging war on her own country. She's orchestrated boycotts, lobbied for sanctions and blockades against her own people in a conscious effort to drive Venezuelans into despair in the hope that they would overthrow the very government that they elected time and time again.
Hay una mano invisible, el mercado que todo lo arregla. Mentira, mentira, mil veces mentira. Claro que hay otros caminos y en Venezuela lo estamos demostrando.
Machado was the final piece on the chessboard of Washington's war on Venezuela, a pawn promoted into a queen by the United States, which has always considered Venezuela its backyard and treated its natural resources as spoils for American corporations. But in 1998, Venezuelans elected a man who shattered that order, Hugo Chávez. He launched a revolutionary movement that reclaimed the nation's wealth from foreign capital and redirected it to the poor, breaking the cycle in which US profits just trickled down to Venezuela's old upper classes. Chávez was the commander of the Bolivarian Revolution. Chávez ran for election again in 2000 as a result of a referendum he proposed to make Venezuela's constitution more democratic. He introduced electronic voting, extended polling stations into the forgotten barrios that sprawled across the hillsides, and built a system so transparent that even foreign observers like Jimmy Carter declared it the freest and fairest in the world. New electoral bodies and recall clauses were introduced, clauses later weaponized against Chávez in 2004 by Machado. But this was hardly her first attempt to overthrow him. It was simply her first legal one. 2 years earlier, in 2002, Machado openly endorsed the illegal coup that temporarily ousted Chávez.
Se ha decidido que la Fuerza Armada mantenga en custodia al presidente saliente al presidente Chávez y que se conforme entonces en lo inmediato un gobierno de transición.
Carmona estanga en mi condición de presidente de la República de Venezuela.
Se suspende de sus cargos a los diputados principales y suplentes a la Asamblea Nacional. Se destituyen de sus cargos al presidente y demás magistrados del Tribunal Supremo de Justicia, así como al fiscal general de la República, al Contralor General de la República, al Defensor del Pueblo y a los miembros del Consejo Nacional Electoral.
By signing the Machado family friend Pedro Carmona's self-declaration as unelected president, she became complicit in dismantling Venezuela's democratic institutions, fabricated media narratives, and applaud from broadcasters, among them figures like Leopoldo López, later one of her closest allies, was central to this three-day assault on democracy.
Tenemos nuevo presidente. Y nosotros tenemos que decir, tanto Venevisión como RCTV, gracias Televen, gracias CMT, gracias Globovisión.
When Chávez survived, Machado pleaded ignorance, that she just thought she was signing in, unaware of the global news that a coup was underway in Venezuela. But Venezuelans demanded the return of Chávez. The oil revenues he directed into housing, schools and hospitals had built loyalty in the country's poor majority.
Venezuela is important because they're the third largest supplier of petroleum. I would say that Mr. Chávez, and the State Department may say this, probably doesn't have the interests of the United States at heart.
Concerned with some of the actions of Venezuelan President Chávez and his understanding of what a democratic system is all about.
They descended from the hills and filled the streets. The coup lasted just 2 days and collapsed under the weight of popular resistance. Frustrated by their waning influence, the middle and upper classes rallied behind private media narratives in a campaign to gather signatures for a recall referendum aimed at removing Chávez legally. At the forefront of this effort stood Machado's NGO, Sumate, which received tens of thousands of dollars in US funding. Yet from the failed coup of 2002 to the referendum of 2004, the opposition made no genuine transition towards peaceful or democratic means of contesting power. Among those implicated in the coup was Enrique Capriles, grandson of Miguel Capriles, founder of the powerful media conglomerate Cadena Capriles, who at the time served as mayor of Baruta. During the coup, Capriles' municipal police detained Chávez as interior minister, while violent mobs besieged the Cuban embassy, cutting off water, electricity, shattering windows, and trapping the Cuban ambassador inside. During peace negotiations between Chávez and the opposition, mediated by the Organization of American States, an explosion struck a building belonging to the National Electoral Council, the constitutional body overseeing elections. Chávez blamed 2 former National Guard officers who fled to the US. Despite Venezuela's extradition requests, US authorities dropped the charges against them at the behest of the State Department. Prosecutor Danilo Anderson was subsequently appointed to investigate Capriles among hundreds of alleged conspirators in the 2002 coup. However, in 2004, before completing his investigation, Anderson was assassinated by a car bomb. Capriles, whose privileged background afforded him deep political and media connections, would later re-emerge as one of Machado's closest allies, and as the opposition candidate against both Chávez and Maduro in subsequent elections. Enough signatures were collected to trigger the recall referendum established under Venezuela's new constitution, and the vote went ahead, with 59% of people voting no to annulling his presidential term. Chávez won decisively and remained in office. Jimmy Carter criticised Machado's organisation for manipulating the outcome through biased polling and certified the process as free and fair. Chávez had won, and 2 more decisive elections followed. In 2005, Machado flew to the White House to meet with the Bush administration. Upon her return, the Venezuelan opposition, further drifting into extremism, boycotted legislative elections, handing Chávez's party a landslide, and then in 2006, he won re-election to the presidency. Contrary to Machado's narrative to frame Chávez as a dictator, Venezuelan democracy was not dying, it was thriving. Voter participation surged, with turnout jumping more than 15 percentage points, compared to pre-Chávez levels, reaching 74%. Across Latin America, Chávez's democratic revival inspired countries to follow his lead. The results were undeniable. According to the UN, the World Bank, the US Congressional Research Service, and independent studies such as CIPA, Chávez's policies cut poverty in half, reduced extreme poverty by 2/3, and significantly narrowed inequality, even amid the 2008 global recession. In 2012, he was re-elected once more, with voter turnout hitting 80%, compared to just 58% in Barack Obama's US election that same year. Machado also ran as a candidate on a popular capitalism platform, but only won 3.6% of the vote. But the celebrations wouldn't last. Chávez was weakened by a mysterious illness, one that even Maduro hinted could be the result of a bioweapon. Machado smelled blood. The revolutionary constitution stipulated that upon the death of a president, a new election had to be called. Chávez urged his loyal base to support Maduro if the worst came to pass.
5 de la tarde de hoy 5 de marzo ha fallecido el comandante presidente Hugo Chávez Frías. Porque nuestro comandante tenía desde adentro el escudo más poderoso que puede tener un ser humano, que es su pureza, su verdad, su escudo de pureza, de amor de Cristo, de hijo verdadero de Cristo, lo salvó de la injuria, de la infamia, y aquí está invicto, puro, transparente, único, verdadero, vivo, para siempre, para todos los tiempos, para este y todos los tiempos futuros. Comandante, no pudieron contigo, no podrán con nosotros jamás, jamás podrán.
Maduro was immediately thrust into a high-stakes election campaign, tasked with preserving the legacy of Chávez through Venezuelan democracy, keeping the country's natural resources in the hands of the people, and most importantly surviving every form of attack by Washington and its chess pieces inside Venezuela like Machado. His main opposition was again Enrique Capriles, who felt he had a second chance having lost to Chávez the previous year. Capriles performed better than expected, but still fell short. The electoral body independently carried out an audit and confirmed Maduro's slim majority, just as Carter condemned Machado in the 2004 referendum and concluded in 2012 that Venezuela's system was the freest and fairest in the world.
As a matter of fact, of the 92 elections that we've monitored, I would say that the election process in Venezuela is the best in the world.
The Carter Center's concluding report said that Capriles and Machado boycotted the official fingerprint audit and rejected the audit's outcome before it even concluded. Capriles, along with Machado and Lopez, refused to recognize the result. What followed was the next phase in a campaign to overthrow Venezuela's democracy. Their violence was not new, but the self-declared enemies of Chávez and now Maduro increasingly sought to involve what Machado called the international dimension, taking more than just money, intelligence and protection from the US and its satellites. This time, it was an attack upon the economy. The cost was nothing less than the destruction of Venezuela.
No basta con ganar elecciones. Hay que llevar adelante una lucha organizada, firme, ciudadana en las calles. Hay que lograr que esa presión se sienta, porque al final es lo que hace que el costo político se incremente y que las instituciones reaccionen. De modo que la aproximación tiene que ser simultáneamente en estas dos vías, con una tercera dimensión, que es la dimensión internacional.
Muchísimo miedo que efectivamente yo vaya y me reúna con el Departamento de Estado, con senadores o con personas que puedan tener capacidad de influencia y posicionar una línea radical, como me califican, confrontaciones no dialogantes, no electoral.
Fabuloso.
¿Qué tal? Ahora, ¿qué me enteré yo? Ramón Guillermo de Leo le ha dicho, sí señor, Ramón Guillermo de Leo le ha dicho al Departamento de Estado que la única manera de salir de esto es provocar y efectuar una crisis, un golpe de Estado, un autogolpe, o un proceso de atornillamiento y domesticación donde se genera un sistema de control social total.
Se está poniendo bajo el amparo del imperio.
Just months following Maduro's election victory, municipal elections took place to elect hundreds of mayors and thousands of local councillors. After more than a decade of political warfare, the country was deeply polarised, and it was about to get worse, as the economy became the primary battleground. This battle, however, also goes back to 2002. After their failure to overthrow Chávez that year, Machado's coalition launched a conspiracy to shut down the oil industry. Managers and technicians at the state company locked the gates, refused to run operations, and even sabotaged tankers. Exports collapsed by nearly 90%. GDP shrank more than 25% in a single quarter, and unemployment skyrocketed. Venezuela's currency, the bolivar, briefly collapsed because the strike had cut off dollars flowing into the country to purchase the oil. The plan made sense. With no oil exports, no foreign currency, and reserves being eaten into, Venezuela could fall onto the brink of social chaos to force Chávez out. But when Chávez broke the plan by mobilizing loyal workers, soldiers, and sympathetic technicians, he imposed currency and capital controls to ensure that essential imports were prioritized. However, this meant a catch-22. Even though the oil industry was still making record revenue for Venezuela, it took years to train a new workforce. And as for the Venezuelan currency with controls, a black market for US dollars soared, created a shadow economy which had an effect on the economy as a whole. Private businesses hiked prices, and often worked with corrupt government officials with privileged access to dollars. Chávez tried to tackle the cronyism and often sent the military into the warehouses to expose companies hoarding stock. And Maduro, just months into his presidency, also intervened and forced prices down, a move that helped his coalition secure more municipal seats in the election than Machado's coalition. Maduro and his coalition may have had 2 consecutive electoral mandates, but Machado was about to land a dizzying blow. Refusing to recognise the result of the elections sent out an increased wave of street violence and roadblocks to try and oust Maduro illegally, and a failed plan to sabotage the electricity grid would foreshadow Machado's tactics later on.
Tienes un secuestro con rehenes prolongado. Le cortas el agua, le cortas la luz, le cortas las armas, le cortas la plata.
As 2014 began, the instability was spiralling out of control. Machado termed these protests La Salida, meaning the exit of Maduro. The dilemma for Machado and the urban strongholds of her opposition was that middle-class grievances simply weren't the priority of the socialist government, and they were the minority of voters. Oil wealth was being funneled into the long-neglected outskirts and hillside barrios, empowering the poor majority for the first time in Venezuelan history. This redistribution lifted the nation's social indicators dramatically. Venezuela's GDP per capita surged above the Latin American average, while higher education enrollment exploded from 700,000 to 2 million students, and millions of homes were constructed or subsidized for low-income families. Yet this transformative agenda deepened the fault lines between the middle class and the newly empowered poor. Mutual resentment permeated every facet of life. Street battles erupted as opposition forces deployed the infamous guarimbas, a term popularized by Roberto Alonso.
A ver, ¿el gobierno de Venezuela, Robert, es una dictadura?
No. Who fled to Miami after rejecting the 2004 recall referendum on Chávez and attempted to overthrow him with 116 Colombian paramilitaries founded on his ranch. Under the leadership of Machado and Lopez, who sent their radicalized young supporters to die a violent death in confrontation with the government, protesters hurled Molotov cocktails at the National Guard, and in some cases executed Chávez supporters. The escalation of violence intertwined crime with politics. Revolutionary circles founded long before Chávez won his first election were incorporated into the new democracy to defend the Bolivarian revolution against such violent coup attempts. But they became vulnerable to criminal infiltration too. To the average person, they often overlapped with gangs, bribed low-ranking police and soldiers who exploited these networks to carry out kidnappings, murders, and extortion with impunity. While high crime was never new in Latin America, the chaos soon spread beyond the poor barrios, into middle-class neighborhoods, and even the political class itself. What had once been opposition through debate and democracy was now swept into the orbit of the US-backed hard-lined movement, radicalized by frustration, fear, and the collapse of compromise. That was Washington's plan all along, to elevate Machado as the leader of the counter-revolution that no longer sought reform but destruction. And so, the hybrid war began.
No es una dictadura. Y tratarlo como dictadura es un error garrafal y por eso se ha fracasado. Tienen estructuras distintas, incentivos distintos y van a salir por métodos distintos. En Venezuela hay una guerra no convencional. Por el hecho que algunos no quieran reconocerlo.
The hybrid war isn't conventional. It is a multi-dimensional campaign designed to dismantle a government without a single formal declaration of war. It fuses economic strangulation, psychological operations, diplomatic isolation, information warfare and sabotage into a relentless unbroken continuum, all aimed at eroding state sovereignty from within. In 2014, leaked emails were published in which Machado outlined her vision of the hybrid war, international operation to, quote, annihilate Maduro. In these exchanges, she referenced the fugitive banker Eligio Cedeno, arrested in 2007 for evading currency controls, later fled to the US and eventually exposed in the infamous Panama Papers as a key financial backer. Another email in the cache, sent to Roberto Alonso, mentioned earlier, included a video of a silhouette of Maduro being riddled with bullets. With Machado losing her seat in the National Assembly for Venezuela's wealthiest district after she represented Panama at the OAS to conspire against Venezuela, violating constitutional rules, she was growing impatient. In another email, she plans to murder Maduro. "I'm fed up with waiting. We have to take out this trash, starting with the one heading it, and by taking advantage of the world situation with Ukraine and Thailand as soon as possible. I think it is time to gather efforts, make the necessary calls, and obtain financing to annihilate Maduro, and the rest will fall apart." For Machado, the coup in Ukraine that year offered a blueprint. US-backed neo-Nazi factions helped overthrow the elected president Yanukovych, but the strategy also echoed back to Venezuela in 2002, where the Jaguno Bridge incident saw rogue army officers and private media falsely blame Chávez supporters for firing on demonstrators.
Disparado contra los manifestantes que venían en forma pacífica, absolutamente desarmados.
What the TV stations didn't broadcast was this camera angle, which clearly shows that the streets below were empty. The opposition march had never taken that route. With this manipulation, the deaths could now be blamed on Chávez.
Maduro understood the same playbook was being prepared for him and moved to stop it before it could be carried out.
Y así va a ser. Sabiendo que van a poner francotiradores en los edificios para matar a su propia gente. Yo no puedo permitir que eso suceda.
Machado fully understood her role on the global chessboard. After the US-led invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, followed by Libya.
We came, we saw, he died.
Reduced to the poorest state in Africa, the West attempted the same regime strategy in Syria, but Russia and Iran intervened to uphold the Syrian government. Meanwhile, Crimeans voted to rejoin Russia after facing persecution under the new Ukrainian coup government. As a result, the US, whose dollar functions as the global reserve currency, moved to sanction both Russia and Iran as oil-exporting nations. But the next move was decisive for the Western Bloc. US allies Saudi Arabia, long at the forefront of financing anti-Soviet Islamists and later the networks of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, struck a blow at Russia and Iran by flooding the market with oil, collapsing global prices. The impact was catastrophic nowhere more than in Venezuela, where 95% of national revenue came from oil. Inflation skyrocketed, the economy crumbled, quick recovery became out of reach. Then, Obama delivered the first of the final blows. Venezuela would join Russia and Iran under US sanction. Machado's international dimension and non-conventional war was well underway.
A dicha amenaza, Barack Obama ha declarado una emergencia nacional de los Estados Unidos, no para enfrentar la pobreza, no para enfrentar el racismo, no para enfrentar las dificultades que tiene el pueblo de Estados Unidos, sino para amenazar y agredir a Venezuela, patria de paz, patria independiente.